Please join me in welcoming Kyle Biedermann, Gina Hinojosa, and Lina Ortega.
Thank you. I think my...
Mr. Biedermann, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Appreciate you being here.
One more?
Thanks for coming.
I'm right here.
Okay.
We'll put you actually all the way
Oh,
over the end,
did
if
we
that's
do?
okay.
There you go.
Great.
Right here we go.
This is a little bit like a game.
I know.
show. Well, you know what? Sit wherever you want. That's
How do you think?
I think we're off to a strong start.
There we go.
I appreciate you all being here, and obviously the decision you made to run for this extraordinarily powerful and high-paying office was a long time ago. You all know, by the way, how much you're being paid, right? This was an issue a couple of sessions ago with one member in particular who discovered, to some alarm, that he was only being paid $600 a month. So you know that. But I'm interested still in understanding why you decided to run. Obviously, you all had lives, you all had careers, you all had made a decision in your life much earlier not to get into this kind of work, and then one day flipped the switch. Ms. Ortega, you've been a successful lawyer. You've worked on the public and the private side of the law. Why would you want to do this?
Well, actually, when Representative Márquez announced that she wasn't going to run again, I've been involved in the community for many, many years. And so people started calling me and asking me to consider it. And my initial reaction was, no, I don't want to go to Austin. I mean, the distance is incredible. It's a time commitment. You're away from family. And it wasn't until August of last year, the El Paso Times published, it was the major headlines, El Paso loses more people than any other city in the United States. I'm very committed to my community, and I have to tell you that when I read the headline and I decided I'm going to run for the spot, and that's what actually made me decide to run for state
What
rep.
specifically was the Times talking about? Loses could mean many things.
What loses our youth.
In other words, people are growing up, leaving, and not coming back.
That's exactly right. We
Yeah.
lose our talent. People that get educated, they cannot find jobs in our community that pay well, so they leave El Paso. Nobody wants to read or hear that type of news about your community, so that's what made me run.
Yeah. Ms. Hinojosa, you've obviously run for office, school board before, but it's also your family business, right? Your dad is the chair of the state Democratic Party. Your sister works on the Hillary Clinton campaign in Brooklyn, as you said, sometimes not changing out of her workout clothes before she goes to the office because the pace of a campaign like that, there's sort of no blur, no line between work and not work. But you could have decided to do something else, and in fact, you have been doing something else. Why did you decide to run for this seat?
Well, when I met my husband and we were dating, before we got married, I made him promise to never run for office.
You made him promise.
I made him promise because I didn't like the life of a politician.
Right.
But I didn't have a chance. And so I really just have a knack for finding very hard jobs that don't pay anything. And so the school board, I've been on the school board for the last 4 years, and I love that work.
Yeah.
It's just an opportunity every day to make a difference for our kids and our community. But our biggest challenge is funding, and that's a state decision.
Right.
And so when Elliott Naishtat, who's a good friend and who I've supported for many years, when he decided he wasn't going to run, I tried to convince him to change his mind first. And when he ultimately decided that he would not seek re-election, I thought I'd have to try if I was going to do what I could to have an impact on our schools.
So for Ms. Ortega, the economics of her community, the decision to run was driven, at least in large part, by wanting to provide a better opportunity for people back home in El Paso. For you, education was the big, was the big focus. Mr. Biedermann, people smack talk government these days as a matter of course. We don't like government. We don't, we want less government. We don't particularly like people who serve in public office. And yet you decided you wanted to do this. And you'd never run for office before.
That's correct.
Why did you decide to do it? Was it Doug Miller? Was Doug Miller the problem, or was there something you were trying to do affirmatively?
Well, I was never raised really in a political family, and I was never involved in politics before, not even in my local community. Although I run a hardware store, I know all the local officials, and I service them and on a daily basis, basically. And of course, I'm involved in all the different organizations in town because they come to my store needing money, needing things. So we're just all about the community. I didn't really know that much about what was going on in our district politically because I was raised in a family, running a business, and just trying to make a living.
Yeah.
And then I went to a meeting to find out a little bit more what's going on behind the scenes at the Texas legislature. And when I saw what was going on, I felt, where are the principled people?
Yeah.
Where are the people that really are looking out for the taxpayer, looking out for the people in the state of Texas? And so they were looking for candidates, and I said, well, I'm interested in checking this out.
Yeah.
Well, within 5 days, I was the candidate for my district.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't I had an axe to grind. I had nothing against anybody running. I didn't really even know who they were.
Do you think the guy you ran, I mean, look, you both Ms. Ortega and Ms. Hinojosa ran for what are open seats.
Yes.
You took on an incumbent. This is not an easy thing to do. Incumbents have access to money. Incumbents are better known. But you decided to run against him. It's hard not to conclude that you thought, I want to make this uphill climb because he's not doing a sufficient job for my district.
Well, of course I felt that way, but that's not the reason I ran. I ran because I really care about our community and I care about the state of Texas.
Right.
I never do anything easy. I do what I feel is right in my heart.
Yeah.
And I ran for that reason. There's really no other,
Right.
I didn't have any axe to grind, like I said. I'm not an activist.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in any political organizations that
Right.
pushed me to run. I saw what needed to be done and I felt like I could do a better job.
And we have a citizen legislature. We have
Yes, sir.
regular folks from all walks of life and all professional backgrounds, all personal backgrounds. You're a small business person, and so running as a small business person for office, you have the perspective of the work that you do, and you have the opportunity. I mean, they're just lawyers. We have plenty of lawyers in the legislature. But you have an opportunity to represent the people who do that kind of work as you do it, right?
Well, again, that's the other thing. It seems like government is so far away from the people nowadays, and that they don't listen to the average taxpayer.
Yep.
My job on a daily basis, we have 500 customers a day in my store. So 500 people are looking for me. 500 people want to be, have their needs taken care of and to be listened to. So I'm used to that. I know that. And I feel that the people are looking for someone that'll listen to them.
And accountability in your world, Mr. Biedermann, means if you don't do the job that people expect you to do, they go to somebody else's store.
Exactly.
Right.
And
We don't have an option with government, though. We only have one government.
And that's why competition is so important, not only in, of course, in the private sector, but I believe we need more competition in the government sector.
Ms. Hinojosa, you mentioned education as a big driver for your decision to run. I want to dive immediately into the issues that all of you, as one of 150 or three of 150, in the case of the group, will have to deal with in the next session. We don't know everything about a legislative session this far in advance, but we know some things. And we know that education is going to be, as it always is, a very big issue, in large part because we have a school finance system that the Supreme Court said was really, really, really bad, but not bad enough for them to deal with. So they're putting it back on the legislature, and you'll now be one of the people having to deal with it. So you go in, you get one vote, but you get to have a loud voice on this. What's your position on whether or not we're adequately funding public schools? What should we do differently?
Well, we're not adequately funding public schools, and that's why so many school districts, majority of school districts in this state, joined that lawsuit suing the state of Texas.
Yeah.
But we also just have a broken finance system. It is out of date. It was formed 30 years ago with values plugged in that are 30 years old. To give an example, we have a unique problem in Austin where we sent to the state of Texas of local property tax dollars over $400 million in this budget alone. $400 million went straight to the state of our local property tax dollars that we couldn't use here. Meanwhile, we have almost 60% of our kids are economically disadvantaged. We have huge needs here, huge challenges, but because the cost of living for Austin was calculated 30 years ago, and it is pegged at the same as what Killeen is, which makes no sense to those of us who live in Austin, know how expensive it is to live here. It's a broken system. It's hard to have confidence in a system that hasn't been updated.
So you don't believe
in
in cookie cutter solutions where every community is treated the same, and you don't believe in sending a bunch of tax dollars to the state. You're actually a Republican.
Well, no. I believe that we need more money into the system. I do not oppose having a system that makes sure all kids all over the state have an adequate education, but the current system is just, it's broken.
Yeah. Ms. Ortega, Austin and El Paso are different in many ways. One way is that the El Paso schools, the school districts in your district and in other El Paso districts probably have bigger challenges,
That's
bigger hurdles to
big
get over
challenges.
than Austin. Do you share Ms. Hinojosa's point of view that we need more money in public education?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in our community, really affects us, because we have a community where the property tax base is much lower. I actually, when you talk about funding economics, many years ago I was involved in a movement called the Court of Inquiry. I was one of the attorneys pro tem appointed by Judge Márquez to actually study the way El Paso was getting funded by the legislature in comparison to other major cities. And of course, what we found out was not good. In many ways, the system is still the same.
You think El Paso is getting a raw deal?
Well, I would not put it as a raw deal. I think that the way the law has been set up, for instance, talking about education, the formulas that are used, the way that funding is made to the various communities, does not help our community, and I think changes need to be made in that regard. And so I think that, and I was very disappointed in what the Supreme Court did in finding that it was not unconstitutional.
Not unconstitutional. But of course, what that does, though, is put the power back in the hands of all of you to fix this, if it can be fixed. And I wonder, Ms. Ortega, Ms. Hinojosa, you know, it is often said that money is not the only answer to fixing the public schools, that there are states around the country that spend more per student on public education, but actually produce results that are worse than the results in Texas, which, if you look at the results, are themselves no great shakes. Are you prepared to say that there's more we can do than simply put money into the system, Ms. Hinojosa?
Sure, there's always more we can do, but fundamentally, you need sufficient money to provide kids with an adequate education, and we are not at that level. We have teachers who are having to fill the void buying school supplies for their students in their classrooms. We in Austin, for instance, because of this broken finance system, we have the lowest paid teachers of any urban area, any urban school district in the state, lower than many of the surrounding districts. And we just ask too much of our teachers, and that it's a strained system that is not meeting our families and our children's needs.
It begins with money.
It begins with money, absolutely.
Right.
And so I hate to even talk about other things, because this is the fundamental issue that our schools face.
Now, Mr. Biedermann, as you get more acquainted with the state budget, you will discover that education for years and years has been the #1 line item in the budget, far and away #1, no close second until now. Healthcare has now risen to be essentially what education is as a percentage of the budget. We spend a lot on public education, and you know there's a hole that was created by the cut in 2011 that has not been entirely filled back in, and in the meantime the state's population is growing. Can you disagree that more money would be a necessary condition to fix our public education system?
Actually, I do. I just believe that if we look at the system right now, less and less money is going to the teachers in the classroom, and more money is going outside to administration and other expenses. Right. So I feel that we have the money there. We
like
need to
school
get
boards.
Well, school boards are not really paid by the taxpayers, so you know. But I just feel that we need to get the money toward the school, to the teachers, and to the classroom.
Right.
So if you look at that graph and you see that less and less money is going to the classroom, and more money as a percentage is going outside the classroom, then I think we see where the money is being wasted.
How can the legislature fix that? What is it that you as a legislator can do to ensure that the money that the state gives, whatever the amount is, goes more directly into the classroom and not to non-instructional purposes?
Well, one size fits all is a waste right there. So we shouldn't have every school district have to apply by the same rules, especially if you've got a school district that's doing very well, that's an excellent rated school. They shouldn't have the same mandates as schools that aren't. You know, so we could save money there, but we also need to just look at the fact that besides mandates and, of course, the testing and so forth, it all comes back to teachers are professionals. Let them teach. That's what they're there for. They don't need to have their hand held by someone else that we're paying to hold their hand.
How are we constraining, Mr. Biedermann, teachers, and what would you do differently?
Just what I said. Let the teachers teach. Less having to retrain them every year. Less having to have new different types of mandates and testing that they have to learn and teach their kids. As I said, there's less and less percentage of money going to the classroom now than before. So right there you can see there's a problem.
You mentioned testing. This is an issue that in a state with very few issues where Republicans and Democrats agree, there seems to be general agreement that the testing system is broken. You would advocate for fewer end-of-course exams?
Of course. And we don't have
both high school and in the grades below?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Now, there is some need for testing. You know, when I went to school, we had testing. Well, a lot of times we test at the beginning and then you test it at the end. But we don't have to change that test every couple of years, and not necessarily do we just change the test. It's a whole new bureaucracy of testing, a whole new system and change in testing, which is very expensive. Again, our teachers are professionals. They know how to test. They know how to teach their children, and they care.
Let them do their jobs.
Yes.
Ms. Hinojosa, you have a problem with that?
I don't have a problem with that. No, I agree. I think we don't give our teachers the professional respect that they have earned and that they deserve. I think that Republican or Democrat parents don't want to have teachers teaching to a test in our classrooms.
So fewer tests at the end of course.
Well, I'm pleased that the legislature did cut back the number of tests that are required.
15 to 5, but just high school, right? Just the upper grades.
I don't remember exactly how the cuts broke out, but I am pleased that that did happen. But I think we just need to. I think it's not just about how many tests, it's about how we use these tests. Right. Tests can't measure completely a child's preparedness for college. Let me give you an example. I chose my son's school because they had a relationship with UT where they do Shakespeare at Winedale. And I love that my child will have an opportunity to learn about Shakespeare, to perform, to work with other students. A test does not measure that.
Yeah. Ms. Ortega, are you also a vote against more tests or as many tests as we have now?
Yes, definitely. I think that there has been too much testing, and I think we've got to give, kind of like what my future colleague said, is we've got to give the teachers the opportunity to help spend more time, more individual time with the students. The other thing that I don't like, and I'm not sure what kind of changes can be made, is I don't like classification of schools being A through F. I think that that is completely wrong. And what we have seen in our community is if there's a school that gets rated really low or a failing school, that doesn't help the school. Teachers don't want to go to that school, and students do not want to attend, or parents don't want to take students to that school. So
but if a school's not, Ms. Ortega, if a school is not performing well, and we don't tell people that it's not performing well, how will there be pressure from the outside for that school to do better?
Well, I think that you don't grade them as failing. I think what you need to do is go and assist that school to somehow help their performance. You've got to get the community involved, and it just doesn't help to give them a mark as saying you're an F, you're a failing school.
Now you are from El Paso, a community that of late has been, I don't want to say struggling, but figuring out, maybe a better way to say it is figuring out how to incorporate school choice into the conversation. The arrival of charter schools, in district and out, and the question of whether there should be more options for kids who may not be in schools that are doing as well as their parents or other people in the community would like. We had a hearing at the Capitol yesterday about this subject. This is a priority in particular of the Senate's presiding officer, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who believes that we ought to be passing some form of school choice to give residents of all of our communities more options. How do you feel about some form of school choice being part of the conversation?
I have to tell you that when we have a limited pocket in terms of funding, and there's an issue of public schools in our community being underfunded, I think that it's very difficult to be sending money elsewhere when the majority of students are going to be attending public schools. I know that Stanford released a study not too long ago where they were talking about how charter schools were performing, and there are a lot of charter schools that are not performing well. We have a couple of those in our community. We don't have currently a lot of charter schools, but I can tell you that it's not that I am against charter schools. I just think that when public schools are being underfunded and when our students are going to be majority are going to be going to public schools, we need to make sure that they have what they need.
And it sounds to me like, although you didn't mention vouchers, that you're not enamored of the idea of taking money that might go to public schools and take it out of the system, give parents an opportunity.
Yes, that's correct.
Ms. Hinojosa, how does school choice factor into your conversation on the school board? What do you think we should do?
As a school board member, it's very hard for me to get behind the increasing charters or vouchers. I was a mother who got angry because my child's school was proposed for closure by a school board that I didn't agree with. Lots of us in the community were upset about this. There were over 10 schools proposed for closure. I was a mother, again, never wanted to be a politician. I got angry. My child was in kindergarten and his school was on the list. and I got engaged, and
Yeah.
I ran, and we changed things. And I think when you separate the democratic process from the education of our children,
Yeah.
most important thing that our government does, in my opinion, then you have a real accountability problem. And so I think it's a slippery slope. And while we can debate whether charters do better, public schools do better, I think data shows that charter schools are doing no better. I think that's a separate debate. There's a fundamental issue for me with the way the non-democratic way a charter school or vouchers are run.
Mr. Biedermann, I don't want to make an assumption about how you feel on this subject, but I think our kumbaya movement over testing is about to come to an end. Do you agree with these two that school choice is not something that we need to expand, either charters or vouchers?
Well, we need competition, as I said earlier. That's the problem. And again, if we're not putting more money into the classrooms, and we're putting more money into administration and mandates and so forth, there's money for choice. And the choice for the parents, just like you have a choice for your child. We need to give choice to the parents so they can choose where their children go to school.
Right.
Competition is going to make everybody do better. And that's where the problem is we have a system right now where there is no accountability if there is no choice and if there is no incentive.
Yeah.
So if you've got a failing school, just like you said, what do? Right now, we don't want to be calling people, oh, you're an F-rated school, you're an A-rated school. Really, how do you really know that? I mean, what's the criteria? The problem is the system is not working right. Our teachers are the ones that should be the baseline for teaching our children.
Yep.
And so if we don't get that, if we don't get the funding to the teachers in the classroom, the funding at the other areas aren't working. And obviously we can see that's not working. Again, competition will make that happen. Giving the parents more choice involved in their education of their children. And the people that are in poor districts or people that can't afford that choice are the ones that are getting hindered. So it's unfortunate that we would have this discussion at the expense of the people that can't afford choice.
So you'd go all the way to some kind of a voucher, some kind of a give back to parents and say, here's the amount of money, or portion or an entire amount of money that you would be receiving per student, take it across the street to a parochial or a private school.
Of course. And the reason being is it costs a lot less to educate that child at that school than it is at the public school. Right. Now, we know the public school has extra expenses that they have to entail because, again, of mandates, because of accepting every child that comes and so forth. That's fine. They should get the greater funding. But we can't be taking that funding away from parents who are paying the school taxes and property taxes and then paying again to have to go somewhere else.
Do you worry about tax dollars migrating out of the public school system without the accountability measures that apply to those dollars when they're in the public system?
Well, if we had that, if the public school system was doing so great, parents would not want to take their kids out.
That's accountability of a sort.
Of course. So if a parent wants to have a choice and go to a different place to educate their child, obviously they feel that there's plenty of accountability at that school. I think that our private schools and our homeschoolers are doing fantastic without the accountability.
Mr. Biedermann, I mentioned healthcare spending in the state had risen now to come close to meeting, if not meeting and exceeding, education spending. We have, according to the census earlier this week, the uninsured population of Texas has dropped over the last year. That's the good news. The bad news is it's still the highest uninsured population in the country. 17.1%, 4.6 million residents of the state of Texas have no health insurance. In addition to having an access to coverage problem, we have an access to care problem. Half of our counties in the state, half of our 254 counties are health professional shortage areas, not enough doctors. What do we do about this? What can you at the legislature do about this?
Well, you know, I just believe that there's a couple of things we could do, especially with private care. We need to allow the nurses and so forth that are there just for private care to be able to give that private care and not have to be under a doctor's authority.
This is the so-called scope of practice question. Why are we not allowing non-doctors to be in the trenches alongside docs to try to solve this problem?
That's exactly right. And again, they're trained. They've got the
TMA is going to love you. I'll tell you what.
I understand they're not going to love me. And my local doctors. Again, being a hardware store owner, a lot of the physicians in our town. That's one of the largest employers of our town is the school, and the hospital.
Yeah.
And so, I know that they may not be for it, but we have got to look for solutions that's best for the state of Texas and best for the people
So
that need the care.
more medical professionals in the tent. Do you
Yes.
believe in telemedicine? Obviously, you come from
Yes,
an
I
area
do.
that would be more considered rural than not, and one of the solutions made available sometimes is let's use technology to give people access to care.
Well, they're already doing it.
Right.
MD.com or whatever it is, people are going online all the time. I'd rather them go to a doctor online that they know than to go online and just take it from somebody that happened to write some things online.
Right. What about the expansion of Medicaid? Obviously controversial. We elect conservative people in the state. Elections have consequences. There's no love for the Affordable Care Act, no love for expansion of Medicaid. In the states where Medicaid was expanded over the last 6 years, the drop in the uninsured rate has been faster, a greater drop than it has been in Texas. What do you say about that?
Well, we do not need to be under the federal government in any more ways than we are right now. 35 to 40% of our budget right now comes from the federal government. The federal government could at any time just say, okay, you're going to have to do this, Texas, or we're not going to give you your money. So if we bring on an expanded Medicaid, then that means when they decide not to pay for it, who's on the hook? The taxpayers.
Do you think the bill's going to come back home eventually?
Of course it will.
Right.
The federal government's $19 billion, trillion in debt.
So government-funded health care is a bad thing?
It sure is.
Right.
And here's the other thing.
What about Medicare?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Isn't Medicare government-funded health care?
Of course.
So should we give up Medicare too?
No, we should be taking care of that ourselves. This is the state of Texas. We'd be leading. We don't need to be dependent on the federal government for the things that we need. But the other thing about insurance, here we've got, you're talking about underinsured. Well, even if you have insurance, you're underinsured. You look at those insurance plans. I look at my own insurance plan, $6,500 deduction. What insurance is that? And that's what a lot of people that have gotten insurance in the last number of years, because of Obamacare being so much more expensive, our deductibles are so high. What insurance do people have?
So you think there's a better way?
Of course there is.
We can do something better. Ms. Ortega, of the 3 communities represented here on stage, Austin, El Paso, Fredricksburg, you have the highest percentage of uninsured in your community.
That's correct.
Higher than the state average. Are you for Medicaid expansion? Do you think we should have expanded and embraced other aspects of the Affordable Care Act?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have not yet expanded has really hurt our community. As you pointed out, we have the highest number of uninsured. I represent what I consider to be the core of El Paso. I have a very diverse district. I represent the west side, which is wealthier. I represent the south side up all the way to the border, which is the Segundo Barrio, which is the poorest part of our city. And then I represent part of the northeast side, which is military. When I was campaigning, I knocked on every door that I could during the campaign. I met an elderly man who told me that he could not afford to see a doctor because he had no coverage. He could not afford to buy his medicine. He was diabetic because the medicine cost $200. And so in essence, what he was doing was getting sicker. And we opened up a children's hospital within the last 10 years when the issue of Texas not accepting federal funds for health care, we started having problems with our children's hospital because we weren't getting the kind of reimbursements that were expected. There's no reason not to accept money from the federal government while it's there. If things should change in the future, then we make changes.
Renegotiate.
That's exactly right. So that to me is really not an option. We should be accepting
Mr.
that.
Biedermann makes what I think is a point that is not his point alone, and that is that the Medicaid system is not working so great. Federal government doesn't always do everything right. Why would we hitch our wagon to something that is not necessarily working so well? You have any concerns about the quality, Ms. Ortega, of the Medicare system? You think that it's working sufficiently?
If there are people that believe that something is not working, that's always something that can be looked at, considered, and tweaked. You can make changes.
But better to take the money than not.
That's exactly right.
Right. Ms. Hinojosa, this has been an article of faith among Democrats since the Affordable Care Act came online, signed 6 years ago in March. If you're going to get all this money, if that money is available out there, take it. If we don't get it, we're sending effectively our money to other states that are taking it.
That's right. Whether we like it or not, Texas is part of the United States of America. We pay our tax dollars. Texans pay tax dollars into the federal government.
Right.
It is only common sense that we should get that money back in services. If we do not, then we end up spending more local taxpayer dollar on those needs. I'll give you an example. AISD, we pulled down federal funds in 1115 waivers for mental health care professionals at our high schools and our middle schools.
Yep.
It's wonderful. It's a great use of our federal taxpayer dollars to support our kids, to support our families. If we did not have those services, we would see costs rise in even just the police we have to hire, because mental health care issues often turn into juvenile justice issues or criminal issues. So absolutely, if we accepted those Medicaid dollars, we would be able to insure 1 million more Texans. It is not a perfect system. No system is perfect. But why we would not do that and choose instead to put more of the burden on our local property tax, our local taxes, our sales tax, it doesn't make sense to me.
Ms. Ortega, you come from a border community that is often said to be unsafe, but the statistics prove otherwise. In fact, El Paso is among the safest cities.
That's correct.
In fact, we have a conversation about the border often that seems where the rhetoric is in one direction, but the reality of the numbers are in another. We're fixing to have another fight over border security in this next session that you all will enter. $800 million was deployed in service to border security last session. Senate wanted a little bit more, House wanted a little bit less. Been a big fight. Your future colleague, Cesar Blanco from El Paso, has led this argument that DPS has not sufficiently provided data to prove that that money was necessary, that it's being even used properly or efficiently now. DPS is saying they want to see more than $1 billion in the next budget devoted to this. What do you think about that?
I disagree with that. I do come from an extremely safe community, and I think if leadership would only visit El Paso, we don't need walls. We don't need the state spending money on border security. That should be left up. That's a different jurisdiction. If we want to separate jurisdictions, that's for the federal government to do. And I think that that money could be used in so many other ways, dealing with mental health, dealing with education. And I do agree with Representative Blanco on that.
Ms. Hinojosa, you know, the numbers would suggest that this may be a solution in search of a problem. I'm not suggesting I necessarily think that. But if you look at the last 8 years, deportations are greater than they were during the 8 years of the Bush administration. Net migration from Mexico is zero. There are people who will say with a straight face, we actually don't have a problem on the border. I'm not suggesting that we have no problem on the border. But the statistics would at least paint a different picture than the rhetoric we often hear at times these border security funding measures are debated.
I agree, and I think if we're concerned about the safety of Texas, then we need to listen to and defer to the communities that live along the border as to whether or not they need this added security. I'm originally from Brownsville, a border city, and I visit frequently. My father still lives there. I don't hear that community saying we need more border patrol, we need a wall, we need more security. In fact, I hear just the opposite. And I think this goes along the lines of local control and just respecting the communities that are most affected to make decisions for themselves if we have not identified a national or a statewide problem.
Right. Mr. Biedermann, what's the perspective from the Hill Country on this?
Well, when you live on the border, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be affected by illegal immigration and so forth and safety on the border. They don't stop at the town at the border. They come into the state of Texas. So it's being affected throughout the whole state of Texas.
So El Paso or Brownsville are a pass-through?
Right, of course. Right. Of course they are. Yeah. And so it's affecting our whole country. So yes, we can't just look at the border towns and say, oh, well, it's okay. Obviously, we're not having people go down to the border towns and go across the border towns that we used to. We used to go to Nuevo Laredo all the time. We used to go to Juarez all the time. We don't do that anymore. My family lives in El Paso. They don't go there anymore. And they used to go to dinner there once or twice a month. Yeah. Not anymore. So yes, there is a problem. But is that problem being felt at the border on our side? Yeah. Maybe not, but it's being felt throughout the whole state of Texas.
Mr. Biedermann, you know, those dollars, whatever it is, $800 million in the last budget, or if it's more than $1 billion in this, any dollar, as you three know, any dollar in the Texas budget is a choice, not a referendum expenditure. It's not border security versus not border security. It's border security versus public education, border security versus healthcare. Every dollar spent in the budget is a dollar not spent on something else. Sure. You will have a finite number of dollars in the budget, and you're going to have fewer dollars to spend in this session because of the price of oil, not only because of that, than you did last session. So if you had to tell me your top 3 priorities for spending in the Biedermann budget Boom, boom, boom. Kind of game show speed round. Quick answer. What would that be? What do you think the top 3 spending priorities for the state should be?
Water, first.
Water.
Water.
Okay.
Water for the future. Right now, we're doing studies that tell us we don't have enough water for the next 20, 30 years.
Right.
What about our kids, our grandkids, on and on,
Okay, so
hundreds and hundreds of years.
Water first. Second would be?
Well, we have enough money, I believe, in education. I told you where I thought where the waste was.
Right.
And on the border security, they had $800 million. I thought it was spent unwisely. We need to secure our border, not just send people
Does
down.
that mean more money? Does that mean more money or less next time for border security?
That means get a new president. That's what that means.
Well, you will have a new
We get
president.
a new president, but we need a Republican
I have
president.
good news. You're going to have a new president.
Right. A new president that will secure the border.
Right.
And that's what we'll have in Donald Trump.
Okay, well, we're going to
So
come back
that's
to that.
what we need.
I was
will
going to ask you about Trump in a minute.
Right.
So that's
But
good.
we'll spend the money more wisely at the border if we have a president that will enforce the laws.
Ms. Ortega, what are your quick 3 priorities for spending in the budget, the Ortega budget?
I would have to say it has to be education, healthcare, and then third in my priorities would be more funding to our community.
In the form of?
In any form. I mean, any monies that can go. Right now we're trying to get more professional schools in El Paso, which will help improve the medical center of the Americas, more funding going to our new medical school, where so it's
kind of a range of things. Ms. Hinojosa, what would your priorities be for the budget?
Education,
Right.
I would say to education and health and human services funding.
Yeah.
Right now, we talked about education. We haven't talked about
Right.
health and human services, CPS. We have children who are dying in our care.
Well, that may be another bipartisan issue, Ms. Hinojosa, right? Foster care, blowing up the foster care system and rebuilding it seems like something that everybody will agree on.
And it's going to take money, and it's probably going to take hundreds of millions more than we are currently allocating to fix it.
Right.
So I think that needs to be a priority. If we are not going to take care of our most vulnerable Texans, then I think that's an indictment on who we are.
Let me ask you quickly about taxes. We cut the business tax by 25% in the last session. We rejiggered the homestead exemption so that ultimately property taxes will have come down by some small amount. There's a move afoot to rejigger the property tax rates in this state. There's a limit to what the legislature can do. It's really more of a local issue, but try to figure out how we can get property taxes down and to potentially cut the business tax by a bit more or entirely in the eyes of some. That amounted to a little bit less than $4 billion in tax relief that was in the last budget. Do we have enough money in the budget, Mr. Biedermann, to cut taxes again? Should we cut taxes again?
Of course. Because you cut taxes, especially for businesses, and you're going to be able to increase taxes being paid to the state because you're going to increase the economy.
So you'll take any tax cut at the Biedermann hardware store, you'll take any business tax cut you get, and you will hire more people.
Of course.
And you will help spur the economy in Fredericksburg.
Well, what's happening is we have the second highest tax burden in the United States, local tax burden, education, cities and counties. We are overtaxed to the max.
Yeah.
And especially when we're growing and our property values are going up, we are getting increased taxes every year no matter what. But yes, when we cut the taxes on our businesses, we'll be able to hire more people and we'll have even a better economy, which will help every city and everybody that we need. Right now, we need more jobs.
How much of a business tax cut do you want to see? They cut 25% of the business tax last time. Where would you see this next session?
Completely take it out.
You would say get rid of it. You know
Of
that'll
course.
take billions of dollars out of the state budget.
Of course, but it'll put billions of dollars back into the state budget.
Ms. Ortega, more tax cuts or not?
I think that, yes, I definitely think that we should have more tax cuts, but then we have to come up with the money somewhere else. I know that we've got to be creative. I know that a state income tax has been considered in the past. Maybe at some point the state of Texas will come around and that there actually be a state income tax too.
Oh, you're going to get along great with the majority. Let me tell you what. Ms. Hinojosa?
No, I don't think we need to make more decisions at the state level to cut taxes. The big burden on our taxpayers, property taxes. We're going to have real problems because we passed this constitutional amendment to divert money from the general revenue to pay for highways. And it's going to cost us about $2.5 billion, about $5 billion that we're going to have to deal with next legislature. Not this coming, the next one.
You don't support that decision?
Not when it takes money out of the No, out of general revenue, over half of which goes to education and health and human services.
But you live in a community that is divided by I-35.
Yes, I do. And we do have transportation issues that we need to deal with, but taking money out of general revenue and taking it away from our neediest
Right.
Texans is not the way to do it.
Name quickly an issue that we have not talked about today that may not be on everybody's radar screens that you think is an important issue for the legislature to elevate, to take up in the next session quickly.
I think we need to focus more on renewables and building our economy by investing more and supporting the renewable industry in this state.
Okay, Ms. Ortega?
I think that's an important issue. I also think that wages is an important
Increase in the
issue.
minimum wage?
That's correct.
Yeah. Mr. Biedermann? Something we haven't talked about.
That we haven't talked about.
Yeah, an issue that you think is on your mind that you'd like to get on the agenda for next time.
Well, I just can't emphasize enough, we cannot live without water. We need a state solution for water.
Are you not
We have
satisfied with the
local-
solution? We passed a major piece of legislation funding the state water initiative in the last 2 sessions.
And then what has it done?
Well, I think,
Where are the
I think it's
projects?
still ongoing.
Where are the projects? Where is it done? And what is it going to do for us for 100 years from now? We know what the problems are. We have a toolbox full
Right.
of solutions.
Yep.
Let's get the toolbox going.
Right.
We need more water,
Yeah.
which means we need desal. We need desal water, and we got to get that water where it needs to be, so that we can't live without water. Period. I don't care what we do with education, health and human services, what we do at the border. If we don't have water, we don't live.
Okay, so we are about to go to questions from the audience, but before we do, I want to thank you for mentioning Donald Trump, because as you know, for us in journalism, if we don't mention Donald Trump once an hour, they usher us off to a detention center. So it's important that we mention Donald Trump at least once in every conversation. You're obviously, I don't have to ask you if you're enthusiastic for Donald Trump, for your party's nominee. You're all in.
Oh, of course,
Absolutely.
100%.
This is not just a New York thing, right?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
How would Donald Trump's election benefit the state of Texas versus the election of Hillary Clinton? That's a little bit of a softball probably, but go get it.
Well, actually, the border security, that is the biggest thing that we'll get from Donald Trump. Besides, again, I'm an outsider from politics. He's an outsider from politics. There is a lot of corruption. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of excess growth in the government, and we need to cut that. And there's not going to be people that'll do that. Donald Trump will.
You're for the wall?
I'm for the wall in this reason. Once you start it, once you do what you say, Mexico will change. I mean, but if you never start it, you just talk about it, nothing happens. So once you start that wall, there will be a huge change. Now, do you finish it? Well, you maybe finish it. But we have got to start putting our money where our mouth is, instead of just, all this cheap talk.
Right. But Ms. Ortega and Ms. Hinojosa, there is a poll out this morning by the Texas Lyceum that says among likely voters, Donald Trump is only 7 points up. I don't know if people in the audience have actually seen this morning, that has Donald Trump up by only 7 points among likely voters, among only 1 point among registered voters. And in a head-to-head, which is basically meaningless because Gary Johnson will be on the ticket, Jill Stein will be on the ticket, Hillary Clinton is actually leading Donald Trump in this poll by 4 points. I kept rubbing my eyes to the point that they hurt this morning, and yet those were still the numbers. Do either of you necessarily believe that your party's nominee has a chance to win? Ms. Ortega?
Oh, I definitely think that Ms. Clinton.
I'm talking about in Texas.
Oh, in Texas.
Specific.
I heard something about that probably over a week ago in terms of polling that was being done in different parts of the United States. I think it is exciting to think that that is a strong possibility that it's going to happen. I think that Mr. Trump has alienated minorities, women, and I would hope that somebody who is going to be talking about the border as much as he has would actually come and visit our community or visit other border communities and before he starts saying things.
Well, he went to Laredo.
That.
He did go to Laredo.
We've got one of the largest borders in the...
So you're enthusiastic for your party's candidate, and you think that an election of a Democratic president, I mean, again, leadership of the state's going to be Republican. Legislature's going to be 2/3 Republican in the House, 2/3 in the Senate. We have maybe the most conservative state government we've had in the history of the state. You don't think that we're going to be bonking up against the White House constantly if we have a Democrat in the White House?
No, I think that Democrats and Republicans should be working together. And I think, again, one thing is I realize that being a Democrat, being from a strong Democratic community and deciding to run for this position and coming to Austin with a Republican leadership, I think that one of the things that I want to do is build bridges. I think that there's areas that we can agree on, and there's areas, obviously, that we are not going to agree on. But I think that people should work together.
Right. Ms. Hinojosa, with a straight face, tell me whether you think, can Hillary Clinton win Texas?
Yes, Evan, and you've heard this before. Texas is not blue. Texas is not a Republican state. It is a non-voting state. If Texans turned out to vote, absolutely, she would win Texas. And so my hope and what I have witnessed is that Donald Trump's anti-everyone rhetoric is lighting a fire under Hispanics for one, but under women to get to the polls, because this is a scary proposition to have a president that wouldn't just bonk up against Texas, but bonk up against the world and cause havoc for our country.
But as a practical matter, just thinking about Texas and the outcome of this election, we have effectively been the federal republic of anti-Obama for the last 8 years. Right? We don't like anything that the federal government does, not the Affordable Care Act, not Race to the Top. We don't like the EPA. We sue the federal government more than anybody else. You know the drill. Aren't we going to have Obama nostalgia if Hillary Clinton wins? Where's that nice man from Kenya? Where did he go? Aren't we going to have nostalgia for the Obama years by the time this is over? Because if Hillary Clinton gets elected, I suspect that what we saw in the last 8 years of Texas versus the federal government is going to be on steroids. And is that ultimately going to be better for our communities?
From what I can see, and I don't run in these circles, but Republicans in this state aren't real excited about Trump either. I think we would have some friction regardless of who's in the White House. But ultimately, I think we need somebody who knows what she's doing, who has some sense to run our country.
Okay, let me stop there. Great. You all have been such good sports. I appreciate it. We'll take a couple of questions before 9 o'clock here from the audience, and then we'll let you all go out into the world. Put your hand up. We'll walk a mic. Jessica will walk a microphone around. We're happy to have your questions. Gentleman here in the front. Yes. Yeah.
One area of bipartisan cooperation over the last few years in Texas has been on criminal justice reform.
Correct.
Something that has not come up today.
Correct.
It's also an area where there's potential great savings in terms of doing some sentencing reforms, maybe shutting down some prisons. Texas is still, I believe, the 7th highest incarcerator in the country. Just wanted to see if y'all had any thoughts.
It's a great question.
Any future potential bipartisan efforts to both save money and improve the criminal justice.
It's a great question, Mr. Biedermann. This is actually an area where the right and the left come back around in many ways and see common areas of agreement.
No, I agree completely. In fact, my wife and I are going to be going to John Connolly Prison next month for that exact reason. We'll be meeting with inmates and meeting with other organizations that are looking at criminal justice reform. So yes, that's a.
You're willing to work with Democrats in the legislature on some kind of reform package.
Yes.
Yeah. Ms. Hinojosa, Ms. Ortega, this issue speak to you in any way?
I think that we need to make some changes in the criminal justice system. I think that we do incarcerate too many people, and there has to be changes in the law to where, for minor offenses, people should not be spending lots of time in prison. There has to be other things that could be done to change it and to save money.
I agree. We see definitely the overrepresentation of people of color in our system. I think that's an indication that there is a problem, and we lock up too many people who are really struggling with mental health care issues. I think if we could take that money and invest it in mental health care, that we would see a reduction in our prison population.
Okay. Other questions? Take one here in the front. Ma'am.
This question is actually for Mr. Biedermann. The reason that I'm asking this is because I also have a big place in my heart for water in Texas. And desal has been one of that would be the most expensive way to deal with the issue.
Yep.
We've been having lots of flooding going on. We've been having lots of different ways that we can capture water here in Central Texas and all over the region. But desal seems like the most expensive option versus cutting back our water usage or any other options. Do you know more about that?
Yeah, and how do you pay for it?
Well, we've had the studies. The Texas Water Development Plan for the state of Texas has taken all that consideration taken that into consideration, and they're looking down the road up to 60 years. We don't have enough water, so we have to have new sources of water. Desal is being used in other countries all over the world very successfully, and so yes, we need to capture that water during flood stages. But are you satisfied that we have enough water for your kids and your grandkids just catching flood water and doing some conservation? And what about private property rights and people having their water? Do you
But
want
the
your water
question specifically is about cost. What do you do about the cost of desal, which is expensive?
Of course it is. But the cost of no water is a lot more expensive. So we have got to have a plan for the future, not for the next 5 years or the next flood. So we do not have enough water. We found that out in the last drought. We'll have another drought in 5 to 7 years. We'll have another drought after that again and again and again. So we know we don't have enough water. We need a solution now. Desal is not as expensive as everyone tells you it is. Having no water is a lot more expensive.
Anybody else? Take the last question in the very far back there. Yes. Ma'am.
Hi, I'm Allison Bowler with the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health, and
Yes.
and mental health issues have been mentioned several times during
Right.
this discussion, and I'd love to hear from each of the future representatives on the stage what they would like to do as a bipartisan effort to further mental health care issues in the
Right.
state.
Okay, so each of you a comment on mental health before we go. Ms. Hinojosa, you mentioned that you think we have a mental health issue, at least in the school context, right?
And I would like to see what we've done here in Austin taken to scale statewide. There was a hearing, I can't remember if it was a House or Senate hearing, on this issue and putting our mental health care providers in our schools, because that is where our families already go every day. The kids are there every day. So if we can put those services, if we can bring them to the families, I think we'll have a better chance of catching problems early. And when you can do that and when you can provide treatment for students, then you can prevent lots of problems along the way.
Good. Ms. Ortega, what about mental health funding? What should you do, mental health funding or policy?
Well, when we talk about mental health funding, I mean, Texas is one of the lowest in terms of when it comes to funding mental health. I think that it has to be higher in priorities. I think that we've covered issues where we've talked about problems with having too many people incarcerated, when care is not provided at an early basis, and you end up seeing people that are receiving care for the first time when they're in the criminal justice system. That should not be happening. And I think what Ms. Hinojosa is saying in terms of actually making sure that there are ways and means of providing mental health care to young children, I think that is definitely something that we need to look at and consider what's the best option on what to do there. But it is underfunded, and it should be up higher.
Mr. Biedermann, this may actually be, as I say, there are very few bipartisan issues. There actually may be bipartisan agreement about this.
There definitely is. And just so you know, I've gotten a lot of my constituents with those concerns. So that's something that I'll definitely be looking into, but I believe that there is a problem there, and we need to look into it further.
Very good. All right, well, let's please thank these three, Kyle Biedermann, Lina Ortega, Gina Hinojosa. We'll see them back in Austin in January. We'll see you all again here at the Austin Club. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
We'll have the opportunity to do this again.
Good.